So, the other day, well, this is a week, 2 weeks ago or so, I was going through and reorganizing my role playing folder on my computer because I own a bunch of role playing books in PDF form, and I have a bunch of pictures of random stuff and a bunch of pictures of maps and things. And one of the books that I had, and I don't remember ever reading it, was called A Magical Society Guide to Mapping. Back in the day, 2003-ish? No, probably later than that. But it's sometime in the early 2000s, there was a company called Expeditious Retreat, and they put out a book called A Magical Medieval Society. And what it was a very detailed, very realistic, very historical kind of guidebook on how to create a world that was, well, I say a world, but create like a culture and a campaign and that's very grounded in reality and history. Not for you to play a game where you're playing literally in 1500s France, but to create a game world that maintains verisimilitude because it very greatly resembles 1500s France. Things like that. They then put out a couple other books after that. One of them is A Magical Society Guide to Ecology and Culture, I think was the name of the book. The Guide to Mapping, which we're looking at a page from right now, is an excerpt that you can get for free. It's on DriveThruRPG, and it's something like 30 pages that just has the mapping section of that book. And it's written from the perspective, it starts with a little vignette about this fighter or paladin or something who had possibly died, and he wakes up and he finds out that he's now he had killed the god of war, so now he was like a godling, and he was now the god of war. But in order to pass out of godling status and work his way up to actual god status, he had to create a world, and he was going to get judged on how well he did it. And as part of the vignette, well, the rest of the section is actually a book that he wrote while to teach other godlings how he created his world and how to pass the test, as it were. And what it is, I mean, that's the framing device. In reality, what it is it's a guide to drawing a world map realistically so that it makes sense using Earth's geography. And, I mean, it literally starts by talking about the axial tilt of the Earth. That's the level of detail we get into here. And it says if you want to deviate from this particular tilt, it's going to have different effects. And it doesn't quite get into what those effects are. And if you're trying to create an Earth-like world, the book is very good. And so it talks about draw your continents, and then pretend that you know which tectonic plates these continents are part of, and the tectonic plates of the oceans. And so that's what this part right here is showing you, is the tectonic drift of the different continents, and how you're going to have these continents pulling away from each other here. So there's going to be a rift, and this is going to move this way, and this is going to move that way. And because this oceanic section is moving this way, you're going to have high pressure here, and you're going to get mountains on this side. And similarly, this is moving this way, and this is moving this way, and because the world is round, this and this are kind of potentially interacting with each other. Oh no, I'm sorry, not this and this. It's this one and this one. I have the microphone in the way, so I couldn't see the guy over here. Yeah, this continent and this continent are kind of smashing into each other. I don't know why they drew it this way. They could have easily had the map, cut somewhere like over here so that you had this continent on one side and both of these on the other. They actually connect. Right here to right here are supposed to be connecting. But because these two continents are smashing into each other, you have mountains here. And then you have this fault line here, which is a continent kind of smashed into here in the past. And so that created this mountain range, and this oceanic plate is moving, creating this mountain range, and blah, 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 blah. And so it teaches you about creating these mountain ranges. And then later on, it talks about the Coriolis effect of the spin of the Earth and the direction of the winds, and how you create these gyres, which filter the air up from the oceans up into the upper atmosphere and then over land, and then it rains when it hits the mountains, and then the water drains back the other way. I wanted to actually get one of those in. Yeah, so here's the Coriolis effect, and I've got the thing turned sideways because that's the way the maps go. But if you get to the example maps here, so here he's drawn in the winds. The black lines are the winds, so the winds are going this way and this way, and then the white lines are the currents of the Earth, of the planet. So you can follow where like the warm waters move and where the colder waters go, and then they teach you how to place rivers and how to place forests and deserts and blah 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 blah. And so, in all, I keep saying blah blah blah. It is an excellent book if you want to create a very realistic Earth-like geography. And this is the kind of stuff that I eat up all the time. One of my issues in doing world creating, and this, you've probably come across this multiple times in my videos, is that I really have to have an internal consistency. And I really need to have something there that I can anchor my brain on. And so I default to a very human-centric, low-magic, pseudo-historical type setting. I want everything to make sense and possibly be, very Earth-like. The world should exist without magic. Everything should work just fine. And actually, that's one of the part of the framing device here is he says you can change some of these things, but you have to use magic to do so. But you only have a limited magic budget to create your planet. So you can't, just spend it all willy-nilly on messing with the climate or the weather or the terrain or things like that. You have to spend it wisely. And that it's something that I get. If you watch some of my videos, you're going to see that I try to create a very realistic and grounded world. And when you see the parts where I create something fantastic, and by fantastic I mean fantasy, magical, etc., I tend to like to place those out there somewhere. So Trocaire, well, not Trocaire, Windhaven, like the Sandbox campaign is a good example. I spend a lot of time trying to figure out, and even if it doesn't come across as much in the videos, know that I think about it a lot. I wonder to myself, to create a community like Windhaven, where these ships coming across the ocean to found new colonies, how many ships would it take, and how many people would these ships carry, and how much supplies could these ships carry, and how long would it take for them to, if they landed on a forested area, clear cut the trees to build a wall, and how much food could they bring with them, and how much food could they get from the small area that they control and have made safe, and water management and waste management and things like that. All of these things are things that I worry about because I want, at any given point, if someone questions, oh, how does this work, there's an answer for it. But at the same time, I like having fantastic and magical and, weird things going on, but I want it outside of where the people are. And that's why you'll see, like, a lot of my creations are human-centric, because I know how humans work just fine. And if you want to go to the dwarves, they're out there somewhere, because what that does, and what this book made me think about, is that's what makes it special. If you're in a town, so my brother runs a very different kind of game. I don't know if it's necessarily his preference, but I know that at the same time that I had, we were running 2 groups simultaneously. And my group consisted of mostly humans, and I think there was an elf and one other race in it. And they were in their very human-centric town, and they were having to leave town and head into the wilderness in order to find these, magic occurrences, these magic creatures, things like that. My brother's campaign, the characters were a minotaur and a troll and a drow and something else, and one of them became a vampire and another one was a werewolf, and they were hunting these creatures in the city. And so I know for sure, my brother had told me, because I said, your game sounds absolutely horrible and I would never want to be in that. I know that his players wanted that, and so he might have just been giving them what they wanted. But it's the disconnect. For me, I think that where home base is and where civilization is, that should be boring. And players shouldn't want to be there. And they're going to want to go out into the wilderness and want to find all those special, unique locations. And that's also part of the reason why I don't want there to be a bunch of weird races in town. I want them to all be out there somewhere where you have to go find them. And in a way, that's how they're special. And I feel like some of that specialness is lost when everybody's living together in town, or when a lot of the adventure is happening in town. I can get by just fine in a non-fantasy setting for that kind of stuff. The very impetus for this video was I was reading a blog, an old school blog, and the guy was talking about... Oh, by the way, a lot of his posts on the blog are all about historical accuracy and things like that. Like, he'll link to demographics of Paris, and so that you can see exactly what the population density was in the city and in the surrounding countryside to model things based on that. And he was telling himself he had just read a book... I think it was Isle of the Unknown or something like that. It's an adventure. And he said that he wanted to inject some of the weird back into his game, because he was so focused on realism in that, and he felt like he wasn't putting enough of the fantastic in. And I can agree with that. If I were creating, a whole world, when I think about not Windhaven and Trocare the Sandbox, but my campaign world with Windhaven in the Free City region and Elonia and the Duchy of the Black Hand, that world, you have to go further afield to find the weird, because I keep trying, as the civilized area expands and as I define what's going on in more areas in the world, I kind of steal away some of those special magical weird locations and happenings and all of that. And the problem with that is, just as I create more civilization, there's fewer and further places to go for it. And so trying to incorporate the two. This is just a free-flowing stream of consciousness kind of video. I did not put together an outline or anything for it. But there's a lot of fantastic locations, and that's why I think I'm being drawn further into the hex crawl sandbox style game. It allows me to create this area where, well, and that's another part of the reason here, but it allows me to create an area where there's wilderness and there's no civilization, and so everything that you encounter can be as weird and fantastic as you want, because if you're, I'm going to say 100 miles, but I know back in the day you didn't have to be nearly that far away for it to be a remote location. But if you're 100 miles off into the wilderness, there could very well be a lake that is steaming hot water, and in the middle of that lake could be a verdant green island with a literal rainbow bridge that you can walk across, and that's going to seem really special. As opposed to if, for example, in the capital city of the country, there's a park with a boiling lake and a rainbow bridge you can walk across that people walk across all the time, because then it loses its specialness. It's yeah, that's just, Central Park with the Rainbow Bridge over the boiling lake. Whoop-de-doo. So I like having it a little bit more remote. The player characters get to be some of the first people to see it. It's their own special little secret. They can go back to town and tell stories about these fantastic far-out locations and things that they've seen. And it seems really special for them. The other thing that I was thinking about, and that ties somewhat into this idea of mixing in more of the weird, is the idea of a hex crawler sandbox style game where it's not uninhabited wilderness where the only things you're going to meet are monsters, but the idea of coming into a wilderness where maybe you don't know what's going on there, but there are these settlements. Maybe you're traveling through this forest that no one's ever been in before, as far as you know. And as you go through, you find an elven village. So you can't have the elves be too civilized, because you'd think that they would then, civilize the area around them, and then the forest wouldn't be that dangerous. But at the same time, you can't have them be too uncivilized, because then they just turn into monsters again. And, it's no different than finding a goblin village. So there has to be some amount of interaction, but at the same time, some amount of hesitancy, some amount of tension. Not necessarily animosity, but untrusting. You're just these weird strangers, this elven village in the middle of the forest, and then these weird strangers show up one day, and you can't really trust them. I mean, they literally are going to probably walk into town wearing armor and wielding weapons. So you can't really trust them that much, but they're not goblins, so maybe you can trust them more than a goblin. And there's this tense truce kind of going on where you have to barter and that. There are some old school encounters where you used to bribe monsters. If you came across your first level adventure and you came across an ogre, you could get your butt handed to you by an ogre, so what would you do? You'd pay him money to not kill you. And the ogre, knowing that he could probably kill you, but he's not entirely sure, especially since there's 5 of you and 1 of him, he's going to take that money, because money's good, and let you go on your way. And it kind of works out for both of you. There's uncertainty, you're not trusting each other. Well, you are kind of trusting each other. You're trusting that when you give him the money, he's not going to turn around and kill you. And you basically have to rely on the DM to not be a total, butt about it. And I would like to encourage that kind of behavior. If I encountered a giant in the forest, I'd beg and I mean like a literal giant, like a 20-foot tall dude. Yeah, I'm going to give him, the cash out of my wallet if that will keep him from harming me. That sounds like a good idea. Anyway, my nose, as you can probably hear, is very stuffed up, so I'm going to end this video right now, and I will talk again when I have more stuff to talk about. Until then, bye-bye.